joined today by Mr. Clive Lloyd. Do you care to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
Hello, Sam. Hello, Hop Nerds. Look, my name is, as Sam said, Clive Lloyd. I'm a psychologist, and I'm of the firm belief that psychology can play, and sort of does, play a leading role in dragging safety into the 21st century. And so that's what I do. That's my passion, is actually applying much of the safety science, the psychological science to organisations who are looking to do things a bit differently.
Right. That's
There's
awesome.
a very short intro, Sam.
No, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. Because I think it's so interesting to see that we're just now starting to wake up to kind of exactly what you just said, right? We're just now starting to wake up to this stuff. I'll jump right in here because I'll be honest with you. I read a couple things of yours that I kind of loved. So I'm a little biased. I'll just say that right now because I read them. I totally love.
I don't mind that sort of bias, Sam.
But I don't want to start you down the rabbit hole too wild and crazy.
I don't want to peak too early here.
But let's just say general review of behavior-based safety.
Right. All right. It's a great place to start, Sam. All right. So I mentioned, my kind of mission here is to drag safety into the 21st century. So look, my background, as I said, I'm a psychologist. I went through uni. I started at least in the 90s. And even then, in the 90s, behaviorism, where behavior-based safety comes from, was dead. It was dead then, and it had been dead for quite a while. And it's like my background is clinical and counselling psychology rather than organisational psychology. But back then, it's progressed. Psychology has progressed in those clinical areas. Long dead is behaviorism. We progressed to things like social learning theory, to cognitive psychology, that is looking at thoughts, positive psychology, right up to sort of acceptance and commitment therapy and so forth. So just imagine this for me, Sam, and you started me on this, don't forget. Let's say I was back in my clinical days rather than safety and organisation, back in my clinical days. If I was still using behaviourism, right, this is what it would look like. Client comes in and he lets me know that, he's suffering from depression, right? So I bring out my behaviourism. I say, right, well, that's easy, all right? So from here on in, every time you have a negative thought, you're going to have some sort of negative consequence. How about electric shocks? Let's go with electric shocks. So anyway, I hook him up. He identifies a negative thought. I buzz him, zap, and you think, shit, that hurts, man.
Yeah.
Anyway, he comes up with a couple of other negative thoughts. He gets a couple more zaps. Now, after a while, what's he going to do? He's going to lie to me, isn't he? Even if he's having negative thoughts, he's going to pretend he's happy, joy.
Yeah.
So the very thing we're sort of trying to get to, he just shuts that whole thing down. He's also very unlikely to come back to the next therapy session. Because nobody can stop negative thoughts.
No.
Nobody can stop them. We're going to have them. Now, if you're punished just because you have something that everybody has from time to time, you just shut it down and pretend. Doesn't mean they're not there. Now, think about that as behaviorism. It's still rampant in the safety industry.
Yeah.
Behaviorism says, right, somebody's violated, nice word, broken a rule. We will punish them. Now, it's not like, they're still going to make errors. They're still going to make mistakes. But what happens now is I don't report that.
Right.
My team don't report that. Now, this is generations. We need generational change here, not just one. We've got to skip a couple of generations. Nobody in the clinical and counselling world does that anymore because we've got better ways. I'm not saying, please understand, behaviorism has done no good. I think it has at least helped companies to put attention on safety and so forth. But we cannot progress safety if we're just relying on archaic modalities like behaviorism.
Yeah, and it seems to me that so much of what organizations have done is just trying to take that because it seems like a very clear and easy answer to what ails them, and it's been packaged very well by a slew of consultants, and it sounds nice and easy and clean and simple. And we can take that out and we can even couple some observation cards with it, some bubble sheets. So then we can even have data with it and track it and trend it, which is now you're talking bread and butter of organizations now when we start talking about tracking and trending and all this stuff.
You're right.
And it's so easy because then we can just have a stick in one hand and a carrot in the other. and we can just eventually fix everyone.
And isn't that right? I mean,
Right.
honestly, if human motivation was really that simple, you're right. All a manager would need is a stick and a bunch of carrots.
Right. And we could all be
We're
doing something a lot more fun than this, right? We could be
exactly
off on
right.
the beach somewhere.
Now, one of my challenges with the new view, if you like, and by the way, I like HOP because it doesn't have the word safety in it.
Right. Right.
One of my missions here is to get rid of the word safety here, because the safest organisations don't talk so much about safety. They just focus on doing work well and reliably and so forth. But I'll come back to that. You're right. The behaviourism, it's great branding, isn't it? Because it is what it says it is. We focus on people's behaviours to make them safer. Now, the new view doesn't have that brevity, doesn't have that clarity. Think about it, we've got safety differently, safety 2, HOP, high reliability, resilience engineering, human factors. That's a lot harder to get your head around.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the new view talks about decluttering.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to maybe we need to start there. So it's all I'm saying is all of that stuff is good. I'm a huge advocate of the new view, but it's a lot harder for your average safety manager to get their heads around what the hell is all this stuff about. You know?
Yeah, and I really love your point on all the different titles, all the different branding that we have around this. Even here's a little personal story. Even in my kind of 9 to 5 day job, as they started down this path, they're like, okay, what do we call this? Because we're calling it like 12 different things.
Yeah.
You know, because you have because we were calling it 12 different things. Of course, everyone else was going to call it 12 different things. And there's obviously some difference between all those different things.
Yeah, of course. But there's a lot of overlap too.
You know, exactly. And I think what's so interesting, where I've even shifted, and I kind of pigeonholed myself into the hop nerd, I guess. But so much of what I've been talking about with folks when we have this conversation's come up quite a few times actually.
Right.
And it's, you know, it's just trying to do things better. Right. And for me, it's this betterment piece. It's no matter what it is, it's just trying to do things a little bit better, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, the branding is really clear with the behaviourism, which is why it's so popular. It's simple, it's easy. And to be fair to the BBS zealots out there, before you can take that away from them, you've got to offer them something else, something tangible. And unless we do assist them to really clarify what this is, which does require some branding, if you like, how you do it, what it actually looks like, even though they may intuitively sense that this is a great way forward. They get that. But if it's too bloody hard, mate, they just won't. Why would you drop the easy stuff to do the hard stuff?
Right, exactly. And I really love the point that you were driving towards in and around folks just not feeling or not being able to tell you things, because that's a conversation that I have quite a bit. It seems, especially with leaders in organizations, they get fearful when you start asking them to lay the stick down.
Yeah.
It feels like, I would assume it feels like they're losing some element of control over people. But I've seen that manifest so often in organizations through golden rules or magic rules or whatever we want to call them, and zero tolerance this and zero that. And we end up in this situation to where we just receive zero information, it seems like.
Yeah.
It seems like the harder we push that, whether it's the stick or the carrot, right? Whether it's the pain or the payout, right? It seems like we just drive the wrong behaviors anyways.
That's right. And I mean, the new view does look towards a more humanistic trajectory, which we need. Currently, it's still very parent-child, you know, hence the stick and so forth. And where there is fear, because in a parent-child relationship, like we're describing, there is always an element of fear. If there's high fear, there's low trust and low psychological safety. And where you have that, people simply won't speak up. Right. So, you know, you don't get to hear that stuff from people. The biggest, I'm not sure if you're aware of Project Aristotle, a study done a little while ago. A lot of the big tech firms, the biggest single predictor of their success of high-performing teams came down to psychological safety. And all I mean by that is people felt safe to speak up, to share ideas, to share errors. And where you have high psychological safety, people just report everything. Now, that's what safety needs, right? No big stick required. they've just created the sort of climate where people can just do that. They feel comfortable to do that. And that's dragging safety along. You can even drop that word, man. You just need people to be able to speak up.
Yeah, and because safety then just seems like it's unnecessary, right? The word seems unnecessary at that point, because when you create those environments in which people can speak up, in which they can say things, they can throw ideas out there. It seems like you're going to drive all kinds of great stuff:
Yeah,
safety, innovation, creativity. It seems like people are going to have the ability to go out and actually maybe try things or get creative, and because there's not as much of a fear of failure, it seems like at that point, and it doesn't seem like there would be as much, obviously, as much fear from the stick, or maybe not meeting a magic metric, or me meeting
sure.
something that's pushed down through the organization.
And look, I think HOP and safety one and safety two, safety differently can play a big part in that, because they're
Hmm.
essentially based on that. They're essentially based on bringing in the teams to hear their ideas, to
Yeah.
hear their thoughts. The trouble is with the new view, if you like, if there's no new do, well, the new view is not going to count for very much. People need to be able to do it. And so that's one of my bugbears at the moment. We have to get better. If we want people to sort of move past the old behaviourist stick and carrot model, we have to make it doable. We have to kind of, now I know that there's an issue with this in a sense. Sydney Decker, a wonderful Sydney who you had on recently,
Yeah.
he says, well, safety differently is not prescriptive. There is no recipe to follow. And I get, what he means by that, because it's about bringing our teams in. This leader will get different outputs with his team to this leader with his or her team. But nevertheless, once leaders out there hear, oh, behaviorism's sort of quick and easy, this new view stuff, there's no recipe, man. You just got to make shit up.
Yeah.
You got to believe
Yeah.
them otherwise.
It seems like in those organizations, I grew up in and around that. And I grew up in that era where people were really selling, consultants were really selling these behavior-based safety systems. I worked for several large contractors early on in my career where that was thought to be just the bee's knees, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We've got a handy dandy card, and we've even put it on Scantron, and you can
Got your
scan it. It's
pontoon.
high tech stuff, right?
Yeah.
And we're going, oh man, this is crap. Why are we doing this? but
Yeah.
but it's that, right? It seems like they go that route because it's even organizations that have thought of themselves as almost forward thinking, as they'll tend to put it, where they're a little more advanced in maybe HPI or human performance improvement, where they at least implemented maybe some awareness tools. They've started doing some different things like that, and then they try to couple that with almost this behaviorism. When then they couple that with the observation card itself and all these other things.
Mm.
But only thing that it seems to do to me is that it just all becomes weaponized.
Yeah.
Right. It seems like it all just becomes weaponized back to the individual, because I've had this exact conversation with leaders, and I'll pick on human performance tools,
Mm.
right, where there's been something bad happen, and they say, well, if you would have just used that tool better,
Yeah.
then this wouldn't have happened. If you would have just stopped and thought a little harder,
Yeah.
then this would have never happened. Or if you would have just done that check sheet a little bit better, this would have never happened.
Yeah.
And it seems so clear and easy to those folks, right? I think that's what makes it so seductive, is that it seems like it is the easy answer. It just doesn't seem to tell us
It's
very
an
much.
easy fallback, right? And to be fair, it's what they know. It's the cliche. If the only tool you've got is a hammer, well, every problem looks like a nail, right? Just hit the damn thing.
Right.
To be fair, we've got to give new tools to
Mm-hmm.
people if they're going to move away from that. And again, while Sydney Decker says there's no recipe, there's in fact, he goes on to say that if we start looking at a recipe to do this, to do the new view, that also almost signifies a regression back to safety one. And yet, I get why he says all that, and yet he also offers a very, very prescriptive approach, in fact, a checklist
Mm-hmm.
to sort of dealing with after an incident.
Right. With just culture. Yeah.
The just culture. There's
Restorative
literally a
just culture
checklist for
Yeah.
that. And so that seeming contradiction, I think, comes about because overall, the new approach, it's about you working with your crews to get an approach. So it's different here. It's not one size fits all. But nevertheless, and this is the message I'd want to give the hot nerds and people who are looking to try, there are many components that fall under this new view banner, whether it's HOP or safety differently or safety two, that have already been applied by the pioneers. You had Steve and Tony on from Queensland Urban Utilities, they actually, I believe, they outlined some really great approaches that are common. Simon Bowen from London Luton Airport, he published a piece on the Safety Differently website, literally his journey from Safety 1 to Safety 2, blow by blow, how it actually looked. There are certain factors like an analysis of work as imagined versus work as done, decluttering, changing language. The guys from Urban Utilities made a big point about that. So did Simon Bowen. That is moving from language like the old parent-child stuff, safety audits, safety officers, incident investigations. And again, I've said it many times, who doesn't love being investigated by an officer?
Right.
You know, we love that stuff.
That just screams trust, right?
Screams trust. Whereas the new view, people, literally one of the first things the guy at Urban Utilities did was change that to learning events, coaches, and so forth. That starts to tweak that trust dial a little bit. I was interested to hear those guys too, who've been doing great work at Urban Utilities. But they said they're 2 years into it. And it's I forget if it was Steve or Tony, one of them said, it's only the last few months that the guys trust them enough to really get behind it. And this is my challenge, is that we often look at the new view to instill this in an organisation without doing the fundamental stuff first. And they could have saved themselves some time, I believe, if they actually focused first on building trust, building that psychological safety.
Right. There's so much there. And that's where I continue to kind of fall back on. And even in conversations that I have with folks, I continue to fall back because people always ask that, okay, what do I need to change right now? What should I add? What should I do? What should I do differently? And that's really the piece that we all desire. We want to know kind of the really tactical steps that we should take to kind of roll this stuff out, right? And I hate even using those words because it almost makes it sound as if it were a program, and that's the
cookie cutter stuff,
right? That's the scary part. But I always end up back in this conversation around assumptions, right? Around organizational assumptions, and in around the assumptions that we form around human beings and all these different things, and how much of that plays into that into that manifesting in an organization. Because I'm a little bit of an Edgar Schein fan, right? I really get into the underlying assumption piece. I think is very important into being the focus when we start, and that's really. Not to dive too much into some of my story, but that's really where we started with my 9 to 5, was targeting the assumptions first, because a lot of times organizations want kind of the toolkit and they want to throw out the toolkit, but they don't want to put in the kind of the legwork beforehand that makes the tools work.
Assumptions play a huge role. Assumptions being pretty fixed ways of thinking, and they work top down and bottom up. So again, and this highlights the whole fundamental difference between Safety 1 and Safety 2, if you like, in that an assumption, still widely common, Safety 1 assumption of management is that people are the problem.
Right.
Now, if you're operating from that fundamental assumption, then behaviour-based safety fits right in. Golden rules fit right in. Punishment for violations fit right in. And so that basic assumption of people and their behaviours are the problem then generates and leads to all of that Safety 1 stuff. Now, conversely, a fundamental assumption differently, or Safety 2, is that people are actually the solution. Now, with that fundamental assumption, everything looks different. If people are the solution, we're going to be really curious. We're going to ask them questions. We're going to bring them in to see how they actually do the job. And so, those assumptions are huge. From a bottom-up perspective, if you've got a workforce who are used to a couple of decades of behaviourism, their assumptions are that management don't really care, that if you do speak up, you're likely to have a target on your back, and so forth. And so imagine that. You've got assumptions from up here, assumptions from who's going to speak up.
Right. You just didn't have the complete culture of silence, right?
Totally. And if you can shift that basic assumption, and this is a leap of faith, if you will, too, for leaders. It's not that easy to shift from your historic view of people are the problem to this new view of, hang on, but maybe they're the solution. There's a leap of trust, there's a leap of faith in that too, in that if I now suddenly change and believe my people are the solution, and as you said before, Sam, that means putting my stick down, right? Well, what if it all turns to crap? What if they... And so, to be fair, There's a leap of faith involved for our leaders. We have got to give them the tools to be able to do that well and to back them in that.
Yeah, and so often, because that's a conversation that comes up all the time. With leaders in particular, hire, and it seems as you go through the organization, we end up in these conversations and what they should have paid more attention. They should have seen that. If it were me, I would have seen that. And obviously we're it's easy after the fact to look down on an event with hindsight and known outcome and all these different things and lay out this coulda, shoulda, woulda type of
all incidents are preventable, right? In hindsight.
Totally preventable. See, I can see exactly how this exactly how this played out, exactly how this happened. But as a leader, they're quick to reach for that stick because it seems like it's easy to label that person, especially. And we tend to label stupid, and we can't fix stupid, right, as the saying goes. So, but we can beat stupid, right? We can definitely beat stupid, and we can feel good about it because we punished a wrongdoer. We found where they messed up. We found where a rule wasn't followed, and we punished a wrongdoer. And it feels really good, and we can tell everyone else to try a little bit harder, and we can just move on with their lives as an organization. But what happens so often, when you have that conversation with those leaders, like, you realize what you're really saying to the workforce is that bad things happen to bad people, that good people good people don't get hurt, that good people don't die at work. And that kind of blows their mind, and they'll argue for a second until they really think about it. And it really hits them that that's really what we're saying, isn't it?
That's it. It's not often put that clearly, but that's the underlying message. And it's like, we need to normalize mistakes. Everybody makes them.
Right.
Imagine this, Sam, if I can just digress for a moment. Sure. I wrote a piece about this recently. Imagine moving from zero harm, all right, which we only do in safety, by the way. We don't do it anywhere else. Let's bring that into the office block. And what we've got now is zero mistakes.
Yep.
Right. Zero mistakes. We've just rolled out a zero mistakes program. We've got posters on the wall in the bathroom and everywhere. And, we go along with that. And then, obviously, somebody eventually makes an error. Because we've rolled all this stuff out and we're still parent and child, what we'll do now is a massive investigation on why somebody put decaf in the caffeinated coffee part of the coffee machine. So we're going to have a big investigation. We're going to sort of put lots of posters and policies and procedures around actually refilling the coffee machine properly. This is what I call dumb down safety, right? Play to the lowest common denominator. Signs everywhere, policies. Have you read the new coffee machine? You cannot operate that coffee machine until you have done that.
Right.
So this huge carry on. And then there's somebody over here in the office who's aware of all this fuss and bother. He makes an error too. Not a big one, but he's made an error. Thing is, though, nobody saw him do it. Right. And he could rectify it quite quickly himself. Now, seeing all that fuss and bother, who's going to stick their hand up and say, look, there's an error, we can learn from that. And so, unbeknownst to the organisation, there's all these errors that have been happening. They haven't heard about any of them. And so what they do, they believe they're like 90 days mistake-free. So they have a big barbecue. They give people trinkets, caps. Big celebration for 90 days mistake-free, and everybody's standing there going, yeah, right. Yeah, well, nobody made a mistake. Yeah, right. I mean, it sounds insane, absolutely insane. Nobody would do that, but we do that in safety.
Right. Yeah. Every single day we do that. Right. We have the banners. We have the nice fancy digital clocks on the wall that count down since the last time someone messed up. Right. And we're going, and like you said, I think it's, one of the best conversations I'd ever had was with an iron worker on a site at a power plant. And it was right after this organization had really pushed out this zero thing. And I mean, it was the safety, it was the full safety gamut. It was banners, it was flyers, it was t-shirts, it was gloves that said zero, it was everything. It was the clocks. I mean, you name it, right? Close your eyes and imagine all the horrible stuff you could do to a location, and they pretty much did it, right? But he came in and he talked to me, he said, I don't know what this crap is. And, real rough, gruff iron worker. And he didn't say crap, but he said, I don't know what this shit is. You're giving me the zero thing. If you all want zero, we'll give you zero. It's not going to be real, but we'll give you zero. Right. And that's exactly what plays out. You have the leaders in the organization kind of doing one of these like pats on the back thing, and everyone else is going, that is totally not real. I almost died yesterday. And we're sitting here talking about how great
Well, mate, companies often end up with zero one way or the other. If they don't end up
Mm-hmm.
with zero harm, actually, even if they say they have zero harm, it's usually more accurate to suggest what they've actually got is zero reporting.
Right.
This is a bit of a bugbear with me because most of our clients, not just in Australia but globally, are in those high hazards of mining, oil and gas, construction. Almost all of them have this zero vision, zero incidents. I was chatting with a company the other day. They've actually gone beyond that. They actually have a slogan called Beyond Zero.
Yep.
What are you going to do? Reincarnate people now? I mean, it's
Well, well, yeah, exactly right. God, wouldn't it be insane if we could? That would be again back to life being good.
This is where it's a little toxic, though, right? I put a post up the other day on LinkedIn. If there was, this is all I ask of those companies, if there was research that demonstrated that having a zero goal actually made your people less safe, that having a zero goal actually meant a higher likelihood of a fatality, would you stick to that goal?
Right.
And some people actually say yes, they would.
Well, and that's a little loaded too, because it's most of the research seems to suggest that, right?
Well, yeah, there is. Let me be black and white about this. As psychologists, we are research-based animals. Thanks to many of my comrades up the road in Brisbane there, who do a lot of the research out of Griffith Uni. Yep. There is no research. I'm not talking about a little bit. There is no research showing that zero harm as a separate, unique variable does any good in safety at all. Wow. And there is research and quite a good robust study demonstrating that a goal of zero appears to lead to increased likelihood of a severe incident and or a fatality. Yeah. Your good friends, I think, Drew Ray and David Proven, who do marvellous work in the research space, they did a brilliant podcast on this. Yes. And they literally took all of the available research, yep, and the conclusion they reached, and they're very, very, they're a lot more understated than I am. But what they said was, if you don't currently have a goal of zero, don't have one. Right. What they did say, look, if you do have one, at least try and make it clear to the workforce that you're not literally talking about the number. That goal is in place to direct attention towards risk and safety, which I think was very fair of them.
Right. And I've seen organizations kind of change a little, and it's not really that subtle, but it is a change, a massive change, where they've said, okay, we went with the zero, saying that everything is preventable, and they've really gotten rid of that sacred cow in their organization. They said, okay, we get that everything's not preventable. We understand that. Yeah. And they've shifted that goal of saying we want zero injuries to saying we don't want to kill people. And that seems like a pretty good shift, right?
Yeah, neither do I, right?
From killing zero people is a really good goal versus saying we want zero anything. That seems like a terrible goal to throw out there.
Yeah. And often that is the rationale the zealots, the zero harm zealots give. It's, if you say zero actually is ineffective, it's actually more likely to promote incidents. They say, oh, well, if we get rid of zero, if you're not a fan of zero harm, that just means you're willing to hurt people, which is absolute nonsense.
Quite the opposite, isn't it?
It's quite the opposite. All we're saying to you is the research is strongly suggesting just the fact that you've got that goal makes it more likely you'll get fatalities. And this is often how it works for me as a psychologist, where we have that. And don't get me wrong, I believe it's well intended. I don't believe leaders are morons. Yeah. People like Dr. Rob Long out there actually suggest they're evil in having the goal. I don't think that at all. Right. I look for a positive intent. The reason they've got that in place is because they want to take safety seriously, and they're saying no harm is acceptable to us. I get that. The thing is, though, some companies become very overzealous about that zero thing. And maybe we've gone 30 days without incident. Now, because we're overzealous, we become literally intolerant of incidents. Right. And we're going to have them. Now, if we become intolerant, all of a sudden we're back to what we were discussing before. We close in, we smash people, we give negative consequences. And all that then does is drive reporting underground. Now, if you drive reporting underground, you're not going to learn from your mistakes.
Well, I think it's really interesting because the golden rule example that we shared, I've shared this on other podcasts. It comes up quite a bit because a lot of organizations still go down this golden rule path,
Yeah.
and we have certain rules that are so important to us that we're willing to fire you, to part
Yeah.
with you if you
Yeah.
violate any of these. Uh, they call them life-saving rules, which is just a
Yeah. Yeah.
stupid term. Like rules save lives.
Yeah.
Right? That's a whole nother argument.
Yeah. Yeah.
but, but what ends up happening is exactly the same, right? We usually
Yes.
take a list of 5 or 10. 10 seems to be the magic number usually, but these 10 things that we know kill people frequently in these organizations. And it's usually those things like lockout, tag out. It's usually those things like confined spaces. It's all those really bad things that harm and maim people. And then we do exactly the opposite of what we've been talking about, right? We create a culture of silence around them.
Totally.
And it seems like those are the areas where you would want even more psychological safety, even more ability to speak up and say, hey, I almost died. But
Yeah.
we kind of go the opposite direction, don't
We
we?
do. Again, because it's quick and easy.
Yeah.
With the golden rules, and again, just about all of our clients have those. And again, well-intended.
Right.
Well-intended.
Yes,
But
exactly.
just because things are well-intended doesn't mean they work
Mhm.
to the end user. If there was to be a golden rule, I would say, stop creating fear.
Right.
Maybe if
Right.
that was a
Right.
golden rule, but of course that would backfire anyway. Have I got time for a short story on golden
Oh,
rules?
absolutely. Yeah. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
true
Yeah.
story. This was at a mine site, of course, in Australia. We've got many the Bowen Basin lots of coal mines very close together.
Mhm.
Many of the same company have 2 or 3 mines in a particular area. So at one of these coal mines, a neighbouring mine, same company, their drag line was out of operation, and they needed an engineer from a neighbouring mine to go over there to help get it up and running because it's costing them millions having this
Right.
drag line down. So anyway, this had a bit of time pressure to it. They needed to get happening pretty quickly. Engineer drives over to the neighbouring mine, pulls up in the car park of the mine, nose in, pulled his vehicle in, nose in. There's a couple of guys, safety guys actually, standing at the front. They notice that this guy come in nose first, and they stop him and they say, "Look, mate, we've got a golden, well, not a golden rule, but one of our rules here is that you must reverse park." All right. And the guy says, "Well, sorry, I was in a bit of a rush." Anyway, he gets in his car and he backs out. He hasn't got his seatbelt on, right? He backs out to turn around and reverse in. Backs in, gets out of, mate, you just drove without a seatbelt. That is a golden rule. He was fired.
Yeah.
He was fired. What does firing this engineer, who management have put time pressure on to get there quickly, to get it sorted out, how does firing him help anybody?
Yeah.
It's just
What
insane.
and it's that's one of the biggest beefs with the golden rules, right? Is that I personally have is that the complete lack of context, right? To say no, everything is black and white. Nothing is black and white, right?
Nothing is black and white.
That story is such a perfect example of that, right? And and again, not to get too down in the weeds on that, but what risk was the employee really at, right? And forgetting that seatbelt for a split second, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's insane. But we see those, and I've heard those stories time and time and time again, and somehow we as organizations we somehow convince ourselves that that's good, that
Yeah.
stuff is good. And we find ourselves in these situations where when we finally decide to change, when we finally see the need for growth and to move into doing safety, to just say better, right? Doing
Yeah.
safety a little better.
Yeah.
Those stories come back to haunt us. It seems like when we
Totally.
actually start to change, and we have those skeletons in our closets. We have those. In my day job, we've labeled it organizational folklore, because we end up in these situations where there's some true events there, and then through the years we kind of add to and build up, and it makes it even worse than that.
Yeah.
That particular example, would the employee would have then been like tarred and feathered afterwards, but
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's they stick around, don't they?
They do. And again, if those golden rules, by their essence, by definition, golden rules are inflexible.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter how good the person has been historically, no matter what the context, the golden rule says, if you break that, you are fired.
Right.
And no good can come from that. As you
Right.
said, it lacks context. It lacks the fact that the reason he was rushed in the first place is not through any intrinsic drive in himself to be a bad person.
Oh,
Management actually wanted him over there really quick. He was actually trying to help.
Well, we try to imply this choice on the individual, right? And there's probably not that much choice in the matter, is there? And I think that's what we see. It may, most organizations come back to that easy answer. Well, the employee chose, and we stop there, right? We say, well, the employee chose to not wear that seatbelt, and in that situation, it's so much more complex than that. I guess
It
is the
is.
way to
And
put it.
it's not just that one guy, Sam, losing his job. The
Mm,
impact becomes much more far reaching than that.
right,
That damages the culture. It
right.
reduces trust. It
Mhm.
reduces psychological safety. It entrenches the us and them mentality and the parent child.
Yeah,
That one action to sack that one guy has wrecked the culture. And I'm pretty sure the
sure
culture
did.
wouldn't have been that great in the first place
Right.
anyway. At such a company, forget installing the new view. All right, they're simply not ready for it. And I guess this is my point. Huge advocate for the new view. It actually drags, kicking and screaming, the behaviourists and traditional safety into the 21st century. Don't try and do that until you have at least created the foundations by dealing with this stuff
Yeah.
and actually
Yes.
creating psychological safety and trust. Otherwise, if you do that, you kind of get one shot. I'm sure you've noticed this, Sam. You get
Exactly it.
one
Yeah.
shot at a new intervention. And if you stuff it up, it's going to be years before you can try it again.
So to say you've got an entire generation that will have to retire before you can before you could try it again. And
Yeah.
that's I hate to keep circling back to some of my day job over the past few years, but that's so much of the conversation is exactly what you're laying out here is that, listen,
Yeah.
if you mess this up, you're
Yeah.
not going to get another chance.
Nope.
And you're going to, when you're ready and you start down that path, you're going to have hiccups, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have a leader that has a poor reaction. You're going to have some of these things that happen,
Yeah.
but it can't be your normal, right? It can't, your
No.
assumptions have to change. All that groundwork, as you put it, it really has to be
Bang on, mate.
ready to go before you start down that path, because I totally agree. You have, at least generationally, you have one shot at getting
Yeah.
this stuff started.
Yeah.
So much of what we've talked about is coming back to creating environments in which honesty is possible.
Yeah.
Right. So what would you lay out to the folks out there? What are some things that they can focus on
Yeah.
in trying to create environments in which that's an option, at least?
Sure. And look, Sam, like many, I've learned this the hard way, right?
Yep.
We'd often go in with an intervention. Unless you have first the trust of the workforce, nothing you do is really going to gain traction.
Exactly.
And again, harping back to a couple of your recent podcasts, you asked Sydney Decker, you do the final thought thing.
Mhm.
What was the final
It's
thought?
coming your way too. So
Yeah.
be
Shit, I'll
thoughtful.
have to think of something. Sydney was really interesting in that you guys had a fabulous discussion. I recommend everybody listen to that one if you haven't done already. But when you asked Sydney that question, he paused slightly and then he said, we've just got to trust each other.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then you had the guys in from Queensland Urban Utilities who said 2 years into this again, hate to use the word, but rollout,
Yeah.
they're only sort of making great progress in the last couple of months because now the guys are getting trust. And that's my point. Get that first.
Right.
And then everything you do, you've got that to hang it on. I actually believe safety differently, HOP, safety too. That stuff is tailor-made. It just hangs off trust so beautifully and
Absolutely.
can only further entrench and embed it,
Right.
because it's all about the people and getting them involved, hearing from them. But to actually get it going in the first place, we've got to, as you said, first and foremost, leadership have got to agree that philosophically make a different assumption.
Yeah.
And that is that our people are not our problem. Our people are our solution. You've got to start with that.
That's a tough one for I don't mean to pick on any companies out there, but that's a tough one for them to kind of stomach, because when I had that conversation, those folks, I'm sure they reach out to you, they reach out to me, they reach out to tons of folks asking, how do we actually do this stuff? And I always have to share with them, tell them, no matter what we want to call it, safety differently, HOP, you can't really go down that path unless you're willing to continue to move the needle on moving from really retribution to more of a restorative approach.
Yeah.
As we were kind of talking, I think before we even kind of went live, we were
Yeah.
kind of talking a little bit about that. But
Yeah.
you have to be willing to go in that direction. And that seems to be the one that people or organizations are afraid of, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I even see more frequently now, I don't want to call them snake oil salesmen, but they kind of are, kind of these consultants that are now going out and kind of selling different models of retribution to organizations, again, kind of trying to paint things linear to say, well, here's how you can determine if it was an at-will violation, or if it was not at will, or if it was if it was an error, or if it was a mistake, or if it was we have these 20 different terms with definitions now, and it's this nice easy kind of flow chart. And if they did this, then they get this size of stick, and if they did that, then they get this size of stick. What would you have to say to organizations out there that are thinking about going down that path?
Be very, very careful. I love Decker's, even though it's a checklist. And on the one hand, Decker's against checklists. I recommend the restorative justice model. One of the places an organisation, even if they've built a little bit of trust in the meantime, and it's a when, let's face it, when they have an incident, how they respond to that incident can have far-reaching consequences. Now, in the Bowen Basin of Queensland alone, the big mining area in Queensland, they've had like 6 fatalities over the last 18 months, I think. And, you know, there's been fatalities. I reckon they get the same lawyer involved, because their press release always starts with, safety is our highest priority. Why do they need to say that? It comes across as tricky. It comes along as political and defensive. Again, what Decker gets at is that's not where your emphasis needs to be right now. The first thing you need to be doing is, have we attended to the care for those first and secondary victims? That's where the care. Now, when we do that, we can maintain, even though we've had an incident, maybe even a fatality, we can still maintain some trust. As soon as we get all political and defensive, you lose trust immediately. So how a company, to me, responds after an incident tells me more about their culture than anything else.
Yeah. And that seems to be where you can really start to get some traction, isn't it? If you can get leaders to start showing up differently after an event occurs, especially, that seems like a magic area. And I've even seen that. Again, I don't like to get very prescriptive either, but I found with a lot of those leaders, they're looking at you going, okay, tell me what you want me to do different.
Yeah. And
that's one place where I'm very comfortable saying, okay, listen, here's some better questions that you can ask post-event. Here's a better way to react. How about you, instead of saying, you know, here we focus heavily on what is OSHA recordable, right?
Yeah.
Instead of saying, is this OSHA recordable? How about you genuinely care about the employee? Because I know that you do. You need to get the other stuff out of your head and just focus on the people, respond to the people. And let's not worry about that stuff. And if we need to, we can worry about that stuff way later and behind the curtain if you want to worry about it.
Yeah. And I'd say to those same companies, Sam, do yourself a favour. Forget all those consultants who were talking about was it a violation or not. Just go to Sidney Decker's website, download his checklist and follow that.
Absolutely. Yes.
That will serve you very, very well. There's a couple of other areas, Sam, that I write about in the book in terms of what the companies that have created psychological safety do. In the safety space, particularly, as we mentioned before, just changing your language, getting rid of any parent-child language, move from audits or safety investigations to learning events, move from safety officers to coaches. Just changing your language can have a big impact on itself.
I think you're hitting something that's so important, because we like to pretend that the words that we use do not matter. But they matter a lot, don't they? And again, just from my experiences with that, and so much of changing the conversation starts with changing the words that we use, right? And again, I'll pick on OSHA recordable. It had gotten to the point in my job that we set people down and basically gave them a list of words that you will not use, right? Because of that, right? It's avoid the you-based messages, avoid saying this, avoid saying that. But it really does start there, because people feel those messages, and they feel how pointed they are. When we send out those messages that feel really good as an organization to say, you should try more, you should try harder. That feels good when we say that. But the people on the other end just go, oh, more of that crap. Or they say, you want me to care more? I already care a lot. It's just going to make me care less if you ask me to care more.
That's right.
Right. And it's so important. So I had to jump in to say that it's just so important to focus on using
it is, mate.
better words.
And when you're consciously choosing your words, you become more conscious about the questions that you ask. And questions are key here too. Leaders' questions steer the attention of the workforce. So there's Doggy.
Yeah, she's chewing on me again, so everybody can see. For those that are tuning in on the podcast, I'm getting attacked by a very small dog right now.
Do you feel really unsafe there, Sam?
Right. I should be wearing gloves. I'm violating the golden rule.
You're fired.
Yeah.
So look, questions come from language, and often our questions come out subconsciously and do so much damage. Easy questions that come out straight from our unconscious. Who's to blame?
Right.
You know, what were you doing it like that for? Inherent in the questions, people's attention is steered to fear, as opposed to just a little bit more consciously coming. All right, what are we learning from that? Yeah, so what will we do differently next time?
And obviously that's clearly a bias that we have, right? That we want to snap to blame. I mean, that's human, right? That's human to want to blame.
Yeah.
How much of that is just realizing that we have that desire within us to want to blame other people, to blame people when things happen, or to assign some intent to people when bad things happen?
Yeah, well, it is literally a bias in our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We are much more, if we see a negative event, we are much more, unconsciously, we're much more likely to ascribe blame to those people. Whereas if we actually did that very same thing, we'd be looking for other reasons that got in the way, that caused me to do that. That's a natural bias within human beings, and there's many of those cognitive biases that we have. But also, it's just our vocabulary. I do this little experiment when I've got leaders in front of me. I ask them to come up with what I call a below-the-line question. You know, and just imagine something's gone wrong. Come up with a question like, "Who's to blame? Why did this go wrong? Whose fault is this?" They come out naturally. Then I ask them to reverse that and come up with what we'd call an internally locus, or an above-the-line question, and the room goes quiet. Now, why is that harder? Because you have to consciously come up with them in the moment, and that takes cognitive effort. And our brains don't like that. They would much sooner go the quick and easy route. So, you know, again, it takes work. If this was easy, you know, everybody would be doing it already. It does take effort.
Yeah, I find that so interesting, because we do. I mean, I have those conversations with leaders all the time, where you have to, you know, when we start down this path, it's really easy to say, well, you know, blame. We're not going to blame, but we still have that natural instinct to blame, and just letting them know that, you know, I get it. When I see, I scroll through LinkedIn, I see stuff, and my first instinct will be stupid, right? And then you have to stop for a second and go, no, that made complete sense to that person when they were doing that, because LinkedIn is like this sea of bad safety pictures, right? When people get a kick out of.
I wish people would stop with that.
This person? I mean, I would at least wish that if they did that, they would try to actually glean some learning from it, rather than just calling the people dumb.
That's right. And why did that make sense at the time? You know,
well, that really takes practice, right? To try to tune yourself into that, and that's the way that I always like to share it. Is that I had the opportunity. I hate to say opportunity, but I had the opportunity to be on an event of an investigation. This company unfortunately uses the term investigation not that long ago, where it would have been very easy to look, and it was a pretty significant event. It had been very easy to look at this and say, well, that person should have made better choices. That person could have made better choices. But I had the opportunity to kind of put the bug in everyone's ear before we even started. It's just that it's that phrase is that it made complete and total sense until it suddenly didn't. Right. To that person, A, B, and C did not equal me getting catastrophically injured, because if I could have seen that was going to be what happened, I would have totally not done A, B, and C, right?
Didn't actually want to get hurt.
Right. But the way that we have kind of normally approached that stuff is we've kind of stuck with that. We've kind of went with, no, they should have seen step B, because if it were me, and it's back to the bias piece, right? I mean, it's
back to the bias, it's back to the quick and easy, it's back to what we know. And again, if we're going to help people shift from that, we've got to recognize that that's why they're still there. And, you know, I like to bring it back to myself in terms of responsibility. If a company I'm working with is not moving, that's partly my issue. I have not made it accessible enough. I have not showed them that, number one, the case for change is very strong, and number two, change can happen. And so just before I go totally away from what we were talking about before, creating trust, something any company can do. is this notion of bringing our people in. Now, some people call that having a champions group or a brains trust. And Amy Edmondson talks a lot about it in her book, and that is companies like Pixar and so forth. They have literally a group of people that they bring in, and what they ask from them is total candor. What do you think about this? What do you think? Now, of course, it's one thing to do that, but what leaders can never then do is respond defensiveness with defensiveness or put downs. They just need to listen. Once this group of employees come in, realize they can say anything at all with no negative. Of course, they're also said no personal attacks. You know, we tell them that, but just tell us how it is. Once they've done that with no fear of negative consequences, and that then the company actually listens to them and does things differently, that becomes self-sustaining. And the more that happens, when it's embedded within the company rather than a one-off, trust starts to shift. And that's when your safety two and safety differently come in, right? That's when we can do the work as imagined versus work as done concept. Because if you try to do that very worthy activity with a group that have got no trust, they'll just, when you examine, they'll just do work as they believe it should be done according to the procedure. You're going to learn nothing from that. They have to have trust enough to say, right, well, look, how we actually do it is a bit different. Now you can learn, but you will not be able to get that learning until you've brought them in and created that trust.
Yeah, and it's so much of that too. I love that, because that's so important, especially getting down into how work actually occurs. Because, like I said, we touched on several things there, but getting into where work actually occurs, because there's learning, right? We can actually learn, and that's really the only magic dust that we have in this whole game is learning. And anything that gets in the way of us getting to that learning seems like it would be bad for us, right? Sure. So even if that's the need to beat people, if that's a need for the carrot, if that's a need for any of that stuff, if it gets in the way of people being able to be honest and for us to learn from that, it seems like it would just be harming us, right? It would be harming us in their organizations ultimately. But I think that's, go ahead.
To me, one of the things leaders need to remember the most about any communication they make, verbal, email, whatever it is, what I'm about to say, is that more likely to create trust or fear? And if it's more likely to create fear, don't say it.
It's so interesting, because people ask me for those kind of pro tips, like there's some magic list of pro tips that you can tell people to make things better. But I always tell them, I'm like, listen, if there's a couple things that I always share with people, is that number one, everyone's always watching you. It's creepy, but everyone's watching you. They're always assessing you. They're always determining what they can and can't tell you. They're always seeing how you respond to things, to different bits of information. They're just checking you out to see how you are. And then number two, it's so funny, because it really echoes what you're saying, is that it either your actions, and I usually just use actions, but your communications, whatever it is, or even inactions, your lack of communication, sometimes it's either helping or it's hurting. There's no in between, right? There's no middle ground with that stuff. You're either, I love that, you're either creating fear or you're creating trust, right? There's nothing in between.
No, make a good choice around that.
Yeah. So let me change gears just a little bit. And for those folks out there that want to find you, that want to get a hold of you, you mentioned that you work with companies. You have all kinds of stuff going on, I'm sure. How can people find you? How can people get a hold of you?
Sure. A few ways. If your listeners, Hop Nerds are on LinkedIn, which I'm sure they all are, by all means, feel free to connect or send me a message. Or you can go just straight to our website, Sam. Which is GYST Consulting. That's GYST consulting.com.au. And just contact us that way. It's probably the easiest way.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you've got some amazing articles out there too that I don't know how I didn't come across some of them sooner. Forgive me, but it was amazing, but I can't remember the exact title. It was something, stop treating your people like rats or something like that. Was that what it was called? It was something. That's what prompted me down your behavior-based safety question there.
Yeah, it was it was about,
that's the perfect title. I loved it so much.
Something about, obviously it was something about BBS and
it was
inferring that your people are not rats.
Exactly. Yeah. It was excellent. It was absolutely excellent. So that's what I would encourage folks to do, is to go and find more and to connect with you and check you out. There's just such amazing stuff that you put out there.
Thank you, mate. There's a book coming out late September too, which talks about a lot of the stuff we've been talking about.
That would be amazing, and we'll have to try to schedule to get you back on when that when that happens for sure. So I told you it was coming. So it is. It's our famous It's our famous ending here. Any last words? Any final thoughts for our hop nerds out there, or safety practitioners, or even the the rogue leader or two that might tune in?
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a book recommendation, and it's not mine. Please keep reading great safety books like yours that I can see sitting on the desk there, Stan. Obviously, read your Deckers and all that. Just maybe the next book you read, I would suggest, move away from traditional safety reading. Read Amy Edmondson's The Fearless Organisation. It is not specifically about safety as we know safety, but if you want to understand the importance of creating trust and psychological safety and just the massive research base behind that, then honestly, all safety leaders, in fact, all leaders should read that book. If you haven't read it, do yourself a favour. That would be my tip. You like.
I love it. And for those of you that are just listening, you can't see, but I'm sitting here writing down that book recommendation because I'm a nerd. I'm going to go pick it up. I'm going to read it.
You'll love it, Sam.
It sounds like it'd be something right up my alley there.
It's kind of nerdy, but it's very accessible and talks about a lot of the things we've already covered.
I like the nerdiness. I get picked on all the time because I even shared this with Sydney that my first kind of thrust into actual reading about safety differently was Safety Differently. And he's basically saying, why did you start with that one? That's the
yeah.
Right. I learned that about halfway through. But that's excellent. Yeah, our folks out there love reading recommendations, so they will absolutely get into that and that's a different one. That's neat. That's neat. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come on and hang out with us. This has been absolutely amazing.
It's a pleasure, mate.
And I'm sure that there's so much value that you've shared with our audience. So thank you once again. Thank you so much.
No worries, Sam. You keep dragging those people into the 21st century, my friend.